Hi, this is Filiberto Amati, and we are here today for a new session on the future of design. This time, our new research with Marco Bevolo was my co-author. Welcome, Marco. And Marco, please introduce our esteemed guest of today.
Thank you very much. We are indeed starting a new series of interviews to a number of thought leaders and senior industry experts worldwide. This time we are focusing on design thinking. And indeed, we start from design, because if there is design thinking, there must be design somewhere. Our guest today is Eric Quint. Eric is a design leader who operated since the 1990s in various positions, divisions, and with a growing task portfolio with responsibilities that he expressed all over the world. He has been one of the leaders of Philips Design from the point of view of both domestic appliances and personal care, down to establishing the consulting capability and capacity team at Philips Design in the 2000s. He has been Chief Design Officer of 3M, and is the author of a book with Gerda Gemser and Giulia Calabretta of the Technical University Delft, Design Leadership Ignited, Elevating Design at Scale, where he captured and he summarized all his wisdom and his knowledge. I would like to ask Eric to introduce himself with the first question. That is actually, based on your experience, how would you define design in first place, and design thinking, and how do you see yourself in the context of design?
Yeah, thanks for the question, and thanks for having me in the interview. It's always interesting to talk about the future of design and design thinking. Well, if you would ask me what design is about, I would define design as creativity applied with a purpose and with empathy. And that's for me the shortest definition of design. And I think it's very nice to see that design thinking as a kind of a mindset and a creative problem-solving approach is used across many different organizations and many different functions. But there is a risk to that as well, is that the terms design thinking and design are really mixed up. I very often say that everybody should be able and prefer to participate in a design thinking exercise, but that does not make everybody a designer.
Yes.
And I think we need to distinguish the art craftsmanship of design versus the methods and tools and approaches that designers are using to mainly, I would say, identify problems and solve problems. Because design thinking for me is in the area of problem definition as well as problem solving. There is a nice summary that I gave on design thinking, where there's a few keywords that are very important, but it is a creative problem-solving approach where you work in multidisciplinary teams, use creativity to help you to set the problem definition as well as the problem solving, but you do it based on insights and you use it for complex problems. And there's a few words in there that are very important. Multidisciplinary. You're not doing it from within one discipline. It is complex, high complex problems, because that's where the multidisciplinary and the design thinking and creativity is needed to come up with solid solutions. So yes, and of course we all know the walls full of post-it notes that are used to capture the ideas that you have in creative sessions and design thinking exercises that then are used to say organize your thoughts and prioritize the scenarios that could lead to good solutions.
Well, thank you very much. I will come back to the evolution of design thinking and design itself from a point of view of strategic impact. But I would like to give the ball to Filiberto and ask Filiberto to shape one or two questions about a very hot topic that is the impact of digitalization on design, and especially the impact of digitalization on design thinking. So we have seen examples of artificial intelligence doing poetry already a few years ago. Google is experimenting with artificial intelligence doing sort of visual arts. Filiberto, would you like to share with Eric your view on digitalization and bringing one or two questions about digitalization and design?
Thank you very much, Marco. Yes, indeed. I think that it's interesting how we can use now algorithms and expose them to various disciplines in arts, from poetry to writing to drawing to designing to composing music, and perfect actually the automatization of composing music and art and design and so on and so forth. So it is clearly that that doesn't make it art per se, it makes it as an artistic effort, and probably it's creative in a very broad sense of the topic, but and the definition, but it's not really a creative input or a creative solution. But it opens the door to how this autonomization is impacting, in particular, one of the central dimension that you pointed out in your definition, which is empathy. How does that promotes or dilutes the notion of empathy within the process, and whether are designers to be afraid of the work that machines can do vis-a-vis the work that basically humans can do in the future? I think that's one step. And let's say, as a context for that, as consultants, we have seen how the digitalization beyond and before artificial intelligence, and even further now, has completely changed the landscape of our industry, because consultants were very good at, to begin with, finding out information which wasn't readily available for everybody. We now live in a landscape of abundance of data and information, and so that has completely changed. And by the way, algorithms are better than humans at finding out patterns and understanding and sorting through this data. So this requires a shift for consultants in the way they work. By the way, a lot of consultants' brain and intelligence can be now sold more easily through reports, which are available to everybody. And this is probably the blue ocean for consultants in the future, or in the present towards the future. So how does that change the role of designer, the work of designer and design thinkers in that sense?
Well, there's a lot of questions in your statement here. But let's start at say digitalization and the access of designers towards say new tools. I remember a couple of decennia ago when computer-aided design was offered to designers. One of the challenges that was there is that you need to understand the tools and you need to apply the tools in the right way. And so you have seen, and I have seen designers that were using computer-aided design for everything throughout the whole design process, and it was not very effective and not very helpful. Whilst other designers were very precise in utilizing the tool in the most effective way, and using it particularly in those parts of the process where it added a lot of value. And so having new tools means also understanding the tools and knowing when and where and how to apply these tools. So if you look to digitalization, for instance, you have exactly the same challenges and opportunities there. One of the things that happened with design thinking, I would say, is it heavily democratized through across, say, different disciplines as well as different organizations, and across industry as well, to society and political and say non-profit organizations as well. And so that is good, because I think there's a lot of added value and advantages that that design thinking approach can have. If you think about digital and the impact of digital, I see a few stages there. If you look now, the most say simple way of digitization is tools that are now available for say platforms, more or less, for collaboration. If you think about the Slack and the Mural and the Miro, these are great tools that we never had before and were really, really helpful in the time of the pandemic to connect people in order to keep working and do their design act the best way they could do. So the word collaboration, empathy is an important one, but collaboration is another very important one if you think about the impact and the value of design. So there's also tools in terms of research that are now digital that give far much more flexibility and access to, say, audiences to check scenarios and certain hypotheses in a far more versatile way and very much more cost-effective across all regions, to be honest. So very, very interesting. But as Marco knows, I was the leader of a strategic design team that I have built in Philips. And we had a heavy research-based team with anthropologists, sociologists, strategists. And what I have learned there is that it is amazing to see what kind of information and knowledge we can generate. But the added value is in the application and the understanding of the knowledge. So the knowledge in itself has no value because if you're not able to interpret it and to apply it in a meaningful way, it doesn't make any sense. So so if you then look to say the metaverse and how that is impacting design and creativity, you can say one of the most simple ways of describing what a company is about identifying value, developing value, and delivering value. And design is going across all of this. The identification of the value is the innovation part, where you come up with hopefully the best ideas and the best scenarios that make sense to impact society in a positive way going further. But that's in itself already a challenge to find out what are those best ideas. But then if you have your best ideas, you need to develop those ideas to value propositions. And then you need to communicate about it to bring those ideas to your audiences, whoever they are. And what I see is that complexity is increasing tremendously. You see that in a company setting, before there was a focus very much, well, totally not in the beginning, because it was all about technology conversion. And the customer was not always, in the center and the heart of that value act. But for sure, lately, the last 2 decennia, you see that design and design approaches helps to put the customer at the heart of all of this. But now what is talking about much more is stakeholders. It is not about customer only anymore. So we talk about investors, shareholders, customers, employees, communities, society. And you see there is a move from more, say, performance-driven, say, an act of performance to an act of that is driven by purpose. So now come back to your the digital opportunities that we have. If you think about artificial intelligence, AV, whatever we all have, the interesting part of it is that there can be a predictive element into all of that. And so if you think about a predictive element, that is particularly interesting if you talk about long cycle industries and decisions that are on a long cycle. Think, for instance, about actually all mobility industry is in the long cycle. So what does it mean? As creators, innovators, designers, you need to take decisions now on technology platforms and how you build your value proposition. That is probably ending up in the marketplace 5 to 10 years from now. And so that predictive part is in there, and you see it particularly in those industries, a heavy research-based aspect, which in fashion is totally not there, because in fashion every quarter you get a new shot. And so that is, I think, very important. Well, if you now think about society and the challenges we have as society, and you think, for instance, about urban planning, then the scope of urban planning is even more out, 20 years, 25, 30 years. So how, as developers, are we able to design aspects into the value proposition now that we know or suspect that are interesting for our audiences in 20 to 25 years from now? Mm-hmm. Okay. And so artificial intelligence and big data can be very interesting to have that predictive element into there, where you can easily do scenario building, where you can come up with say scenarios that the accuracy of those scenarios will go up. Still, the interpretation and the application of all of that data needs to happen by say multidisciplinary teams taking the right decisions and translating this into the right creations, whatever they are.
Thank you very much. Follow up on the notion you introduced of the democratization of design thinking. Isn't there a risk? Because now, by the way, I did business school. I'm not a designer, but you actually get taught design thinking in business school. Some of the methodology, some of the aspects, foresights, insights, problem solving, canvas, whatever, methodologies, brainstorming, and how to choose the colors of the post-its, of course, and so on and so forth. But is there a risk that this democratization becomes a massification, then dilutes also?
Sure, it is a risk. So there's two sides of the coin here. At one side, it is great that the approaches and the mindsets of creatives and designers are taught to other disciplines as well. I would refer to this as okay, the language of the designers is taught, so other disciplines understand and can interpret the language of designers in much better, so that they can work better together. But as soon as it starts to become a kind of a substitute, okay, let me give me all the tools related to design thinking, and now I'm a designer, then things go completely wrong. And so I mentioned already, knowing about the design thinking, say, tool sets and tools and mindset doesn't mean that you become a designer. And I had that challenge many, many times in my practice, where when I was growing design in 3M, for instance, I got all of these requests of people, engineers and scientists that approached me by saying, "Oh, I want to come and work in your team. Can you?" I have done a design thinking course at IDEO D School, and so I'm very ready to join the team. And I always said, "Well, that's very interesting. Yes, we need, of course, scientists and engineers and marketeers and whatever collaborators that understand what we do, because then we can better collaborate. You know, the fact that I might know about engineering processes doesn't make me an engineer, or financial processes doesn't make me a financial expert. And I think one of the tasks that designers have is to be, first of all, very proud about what design is, but also be very clear about explaining that the added value is not in knowing about design thinking. It is about collaborating with design thinkers in a more effective way. And I think that is one of the risks that when I saw in 3M that design thinking became very popular, and you have companies like IBM that deployed design thinking courses for all their employees almost all around the world. That's great to do, but it's also good to know that I think the ownership of design thinking should be with design. Design is responsible as a function to develop the tool sets, to make sure that the communication is done right, to innovate design if needed, and design thinking, to communicate about it, and to collaborate through design thinking with all of these different functions. Yes, what I did is working together with HR and with R&D and with marketing to make sure that those tools were accessible to everybody. But if we would do a design thinking workshop or an exercise, design would be the owner of managing and coordinating and mentoring all of it.
Thank you very much. Marco?
Thank you. I think your elaborate answer gave some insight also about our shared history in the 2000s at Philips Design, when indeed the anthropologists, the psychologists, the sociologists were part of the design team, of which I always have to explain that in spite I am an Italian, I'm not a designer, but I'm a sociologist, and I don't study the society of today, but the society in 5 or 10 years, which makes my life very complicated. But you understood immediately the first time we met in 1998 what was the scope of my specialization and how the specialization could fit in a design team like the one we belonged those days and those years. Looking at your book, you structure the book, and this is the table of content that I bring into light, into 3 steps: establishing the design foundation, empowering the design team, elevating to design excellence. So foundation, empowerment, excellence. I think this will be probably interpreted by most people who read and use the book to lecture and to teach as a roadmap. I also see a potential future progression for the design function within a company, from foundation to empowerment to excellence. Do you think that the design function should indeed follow this kind of roadmaps, whereby when you install it, maybe it's not clear yet what a sociologist can do. And then when you are at the level of excellence, you have a multidisciplinary team over time. And how do you see, with this kind of roadmap thinking, if it's correct, how would you see the design as a practice and design thinking evolve in the future in general? So starting from the organizational reality in companies, and then going into the dimension you mentioned of society and and culture.
Well, first thing is, if you are approached by a CEO to have a role as a chief design officer, the task is pretty simple. You can summarize that in one sentence. It's something like, can you help us to build a creative and design platform, global platform, and build the capabilities around this to advance, say, innovation and enhance the brand for the company. So that's one sentence, and then you start to think, okay, what does it mean? And everything has a timing. We know in innovation, timing is very important. Because you can have the most marvelous ideas, and you can have a view of the most advanced design function. But if the enabling conditions and the capabilities are not there in the company, you go nowhere. So first thing you need to do as a leader is understand what is the zero measurement, so to say, what is the actual, state of the art of the design function and creativity and creative collaboration in the company before you can make a plan how to go forward. Making a roadmap is extremely important. One of the things we learned from the research, for the book we researched 59 design leaders all around the world. And what I have seen is that there was a lot of passion and energy of those leaders to elevate design and to grow design in those organizations, in their organizations. But I saw also, at the other hand, a lot of disappointment and challenge and even frustration in many cases of people not achieving what they had in mind. And there was a mismatch between their ambition out there and the realities and how to get there. And so one great way is to set a strategic vision, but also be very openly about it, and make a roadmap of how you come from the as is to the to be. Why is that important? Because it helps you to manage expectations. It's a very good way of avoiding that the organization is pulling you in all kind of say ventures that maybe are not yet the appropriate ones because you're not there yet. And if you are very clear about what your roadmap is, you set expectations and you say, oh, wait, on my roadmap, what you expect me now to do doesn't make a lot of sense. We're not ready for it, but maybe in 2 years or in a year we're ready for it. So that's one of the things. And the thing that was missing most in those interviews that we found out was what I call a design governance. And so the design governance is a kind of an aligned document where you agree, an endorsed document and communicated document where you have put down, say, the starting points for the engagement of design with all of the organization. So that means that in the document, you have defined and agreed about how is design sponsored in terms of budgeting, who is managing the designers, what is the location of the designers if you talk about in one design studio or scattered around the businesses. It's about the rules of engagement of where's and how is the design team enabled, and of course the scope of design. Are you only tactical? Are you also in strategic? Are you mainly focusing on the innovation part, or also in brand? What is the scope? And what I have seen is that, and I refer very often to this, is that if you don't have that groundwork and the framework defined of what that function is going to be, you run the risk that if you start to elevate design and grow design, that you ask for trouble. You are going to scale trouble, and that happens a lot. And so it is very nice to have all of these visionary ideas of what the function could be. I mean, very often related to design excellence. But you can be very sophisticated, but if the foundation is not there, then you are not probably very successful in scaling at all. So the methodology that we talk about in the book is indeed setting that foundation. And then you have to, of course, empower the team later on in growing. So by setting the foundation, you have, of course, the elements of what is design leadership about? What is design about? What is your vision and mission? And then you go into the next steps of the model, where you talk about elements that are components to go from the foundational elements to the empowerment of the team and the growing of the team to, in the end, driving that design excellence. Well, you should realize that is not an overnight act. That can easily take 10 years. I have given myself 5 years at 3M to do this. And just because of the complexity, because you talk about organizations that are in 80 countries. You talk about many different divisions and businesses, 50 or 30. You talk about 100,000 people. And so that means that is hugely complex, and therefore it is a transformation process. So it is not adding design to an organization is not about adding the capability somewhere. It is actually how the company works, because you have to integrate it into processes. And so therefore in the steps, we talk about in order to establish that foundation very well, you need to make sure that you have a clear design direction. So that's the design roadmap and the strategy and the vision going forward. Then you need to build a kind of a design organization where that governance comes in as well, because you need to have an alignment with all of the stakeholders in the company to do so. And then if you go to empowering the team, you need to have a design taxonomy available to make sure that you have described the scope of design, but also you have described the career path of the people in design, so that they know what their future is and how they can grow and learn, as well as how you build design resources. And you need to innovate. What new resources do I need, for instance, in the digitalization, to make sure that we are ready to go for elevating design to that excellence level. It's there where you start to scale, and where you hope to bring that vision alive, where you build that design excellence. And what is now the learning of the book is that that design excellence is never reached, because you're always on a journey that it has a moving target, where the dynamics in society and in companies is changing. That means that design need to be very versatile and say adaptive to new situations. And that means that you excellence is an act of continuous reinvention that keeps you in the Premier League of acting design.
May I? I think this is very insightful. Two follow-ups, intertwined. So in terms of design leadership, in the post-COVID-19 era, where remote work is a reality, how do you, or not how do you, but what is your recommendation in terms of do's and don'ts to keep building a culture within the design organization, even though you have remote workers and people don't necessarily meet as often? And related to that, based on what you just commented, is the role, because I see the role of creativity to reshape the boundaries. So is the role of the design organization to transform the companies to become more inclusive, more sustainable, and how so?
Yeah, so if you think about that future role of design, then I think complexity is getting more. Of course, it's not good enough anymore to put the customer in the center of all of this. I think we need to put society in the center of all of this. And so if that is the case, then the complexity is getting up. And so the need for design across all of the main processes of a company and the need for creativity and collaboration is extremely important. And so if you think about the Sustainable Development Goals, you know, they are all of systemic complexity. And so that means you need to go already into a strategic approach, not a tactical approach, to go and work on these. But even more important, you cannot solve these kind of challenges anymore from within one organization. So if you think about water or air or education or health or mobility, these are all these big themes. You need to work together across the boundaries of organizations, industries, policymakers, governments, educational institutes and academic institutes to make sure that you come up with say, scenarios and solutions that go beyond, you know, maximizing the shareholders' value within one organization. So there is a role for design to play. Why? Because I think besides the empathy that designers can bring in, but other people can do that as well, is the creativity and particularly the imagination. I think that is extremely important. So what I have seen with many business leaders, they know exactly how to run a business. They know how to define their KPIs. They know how to fire up an organization in the good way of putting, say, the people behind the strategy and the vision. But in the end, you need to lead organizations to what that preferable future is. And so imagination is important to have, but also how to make that the imaginary, say, strategies tangible is something where designers come in very often. So in the book, we describe about that future role of designers. And what we see is a kind of an equilibrium where the designer or design leaders are in the center one way or another. And we have to deal at one side about the emerging technologies and how to incorporate those into our act of design and design thinking going forward. But we need to also inspire culture, where you are a cultural leader to create a creative culture within an organization and even beyond your own design team. You are leading and say engaging in advancing collaborations, like I mentioned already, far beyond the collaborations within your own team, within your own organization. It is, you know, across organizations and across different types of organizations. And then, of course, there is that design for equity, that you want to make sure that whatever solutions you come up with and engage into is accessible to anybody, hopefully, in the world. And so how are you going to deal with that? Because we know the disparity between, you know, accessibility of health and access to health and energy and clean water and all of that is becoming bigger, and is not going to help us to solve the issues that we have and that are mentioned in the goals, in the United Development Goals. And then, of course, this is all about sustainable innovation, which is impacting the planet, where, you know, designers play a role. Now, Filiberto, to come back on your question on, you know, the post-COVID and how is that going to happen? In my previous role, I was chief brand and design officer of the company. Why? Because my act was not only focusing on the technology conversion, say the innovation process, but also very much on, and that was the identification of value, but also on the development and the delivery of the value. So the delivery of the value is very much a marketing and a branding act. And I always say, you know, the most exciting brands, they don't happen and they don't exist by coincidence. They are carefully curated and designed. And so if you think about a world where we live in now, where everybody is working from home, there is a kind of a dualism that we describe many more in the book, dualisms that design leaders have to navigate, is the dualism of, having a fully remote team at one side and having a full on-site team that you can work with and have dialogues with and start to shape, ideas for the future. I think both are probably not good, but you will for sure get a hybrid where I think you will utilize the things that we have learned through the COVID, that we probably are much more flexible in allowing people to work from home and also seeing people adding value in that way. But at the other hand, you need to also be together, particularly when it comes down to different disciplines and across people across different organizations, to build relationships that are going to help to create those answers on the bigger complex questions and challenges that we have in the world. So yeah, that's probably my answer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Marco?
Well, as a last question, I would like to go at the very first page of the book, and it's a bit of an intellectual question, maybe, but I'm curious. The answer is printed, but I'm curious to hear it from you. In Italian design, especially, the role of the book by the designer is really crucial. Andrea Branzi has published a lot of books. You have books by Rota on his creative process, important books by Sotsas, and so on. You chose to publish the book with two co-authors who are academics, and actually the preface of the book is why this book with these authors. That is quite for me insightful. Why did you could have you could have done the book with a journalist. You could have done the book with different co-authors along with a ghostwriter. Why did you choose Gerda and Giulia Calabretta from university context?
Well, the need for the book was actually instigated to me several times when doing, lectures and keynote speeches, where people asked me after the speech, well, Eric, have you written a book? We would love to read more about your experiences and your insights. And I never had the time to do that. And in learning about Gerda's work and Giulia's work, who wrote a book about strategic design before. So in the research, we have learned through the eyes of 59 other design leaders all kind of different approaches and challenges and dualisms that they need to navigate and how successful they are and not. And the experiences that I bring to the book is a bit of a description of what I have learned over the last 35 years, in many cases in the hard way. But I also wanted to make sure that the substance and the foundation of the book is much more wider, going wider than my personal opinion and experiences only. And so that is the value of the book. And it is interesting that you asked this, but if you would ask me what is the essence of how you approached your role at 3M, I would say, well, I have applied design thinking to my own challenge that I had to bring design to the next level in 3M. If you would ask me, how have you written the book? I would say to you, I have applied design thinking and collaborative approaches to writing a book that goes far more beyond what I think as an individual, but is a mix of insights and the experiences of two academics and other design leaders, that makes it a more comprehensive and hopefully a more valuable book with, 170 quotes of those people that we have interviewed, to give it more substance and a better, maybe inspiration for those future generations.
Thank you so much. I think our this dialogue is coming to its closure. Our dialogue is going to continue for another. We know each other for 23 years, so I would suggest 23 years ahead. We will have another interview with Filiberto, and we will discuss your next chapter in your book. Filiberto, would you like to close?
No, I just wanted to thank you, Eric, for taking the time and talking to us. It has been really a great and inspiring conversation. So I look forward to speaking to you in the future, maybe doing a second take on the future of design.
That's how the book started. After a first interview with Gerda and Julia, they decided to have a few interviews, and then we decided to write the book. So my pleasure, and I think what we have discussed and much more detail and flavor you can find back in the book. So feel free to read the book and enjoy. And thank you for having me.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.